A couple things I want to review from last week. The broken windows theory. That's important for us to be familiar with, not just in this class, absolutely in this class, but as we move forward. I can't think of a class that I teach that at some point the broken windows theory doesn't come up. So can somebody tell me just a thing or two? What do you remember about that broken windows theory? The one we talked about last week. Smaller cramps estimate. So the literal explanation of that, I won't go into as much detail as I did last week, but we talked about a warehouse where somebody vandalizes and throws a rock through the window, it breaks the window, but nobody fixes it. And then things progress. Now there's graffiti, and there's a homeless encampment. Now somebody's using it to cook meth. Like if you don't fix the problem's only going to get worse. So that's where that word picture comes from. But it comes from any neighborhood, that's a commercial example, but if you have street lights out in a neighborhood and nobody ever fixes the street lights, and then now you've given darkness, men love the dark for it hides their evil deeds. So you've got darkness for criminals to engage in criminality, whether it be burglaries, robberies, dealing drugs, things like that. Now they progress from the dealing drugs. Now you got some turf wars, and from the turf wars, you've got possible homicides, all stemming from what could have possibly been prevented because just fix the stoplight or the street light, things like that. So that's an example of how things can get worse if you don't fix them. So please keep that broken windows theory in mind as we go forward. I'm absolutely positive you'll see it again. Talk about the political era, the reform era, and the community era. The political era being having a lot of corruption based on politicians having influence over law enforcement organizations. From there, the pendulum swinging and realizing this isn't a great idea. So detaching from the political influence and allowing a lot of engaging in more organization through agencies, paramilitary influence, and then going from that, swinging even further to community influence in the community era, make sure that people have input on the community, or they are the community, people are the community, so they want to have input on the way they are policed. That's probably the quickest and most down and dirty way I can describe those three eras. And then don't forget there is actually a fourth era, the newest one called the new era, that discusses terrorism. So moving on to chapter 2. So one of the things that has been discussed last week, I think in a different class, not necessarily this class, was the idea of living in a democracy. Most people say, or most people here talk about the United States as being a democracy. We're going to define that in a second, but just to be perfectly transparently clear, it is a bit of a misnomer to say that the United States is a democracy. We say it all the time, but we're technically not. We're technically not an actual technical democracy. If we were, we would vote on every single thing, and we don't. We vote once a year, maybe twice a year. Who does more voting than us as a citizenry, as a community? Are there folks that there are folks that vote more than us on things? Who are they? Our legislators, our representatives. So we we elect Congress people to go to either the state capitol or the federal capitol, depending on what level we're talking about. And they do our voting for us for the most part. They vote on a lot more stuff than we do. We can't go to the polls every single day or every week and vote on stuff. Things would grind to a halt. That would be a true democracy. If we were a lot smaller, we could have a true democracy. We are a democratic republic. We are represented by the folks that we elect. So very fine point to make, but just to be perfectly clear, I want you to understand that we are not a literal democracy. I don't know off the top of my head if there are any left in the world, any literal democracies left, but there may be. So that being said, we're gonna colloquially say, kind of slang, say we're a democracy because we are a democratic republic And in general, we enjoyed the benefits of a democracy, even though we have that slight change. So even though going forward in class, we'll say that in general we enjoy the benefits of a democracy and call ourselves a democracy. What does that mean? When we use that term, now we run it into the ground. The idea, we'll start over here with Mr. Betts. When you hear the word democracy, we live in a democracy. What does that mean to you personally?
Not one person is in control
Oh my.
of everything.
All right, yeah, not one person is in control. So we have an individualized leader. We have the president. What keeps the president from being in control? Like, because I agree, we don't have one person in absolute control. So why isn't the president in absolute control? Absolutely, checks and balances. So we have things that will prevent an individual from making decisions that affect us positively or negatively without going through other channels. In our case, we have two other branches of government. We have the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. So we are afforded some privileges, some rights. We'll talk about the benefits. I mean, I guess we could, if there are some liabilities you can think of, we could discuss those too. Just we're focusing today on the benefits outside or even along with what Mr. Betts said on not having one person be in charge. What are the benefits or the benefit of that in a democracy? Why is that good in general? If you believe it's good.
The right to vote, I guess. So you have, being told what you can do, you have an opinion or.
And you have to say, and I'm going to come back to that actually. That's a really great point because it not only applies to like legislative decisions, but it also applies to policing, which is what we're discussing today. You have a say in the policing that you get, and so we'll come back to that. Scarlett, you have anything else? What benefits? What is good about living in a democracy, for lack of a better way of putting it, if anything? Like I said, we have freedoms. So what types of freedoms? What types of freedoms does Scarlett enjoy? Like what do you like about this democracy? I'm sorry?
I like that. I don't know how to explain it.
There's so it can be broad. I understand that. So we'll kind of focus it down. Let's see. If you walk down the street, legally walking down the street, you're not engaging in any criminality, can a police officer stop and search you in general? Not without good cause, right? There's a codified rationale that will prevent officers from just stopping you for no reason and searching you. You have the right to be secure in your person and your property from unreasonable searches and seizures. Does that sound familiar to anybody? That terminology? Being secure in your person and property and free from unreasonable searches, protected from unreasonable searches and seizures. Where does that come from? The Constitution, you said? Yeah, the Constitution. Yeah. The Bill of Rights, technically, the amendments, the first amendment to the Constitution. So it wasn't there initially. It's so important that they realized, man, we got to put that in there. I said fourth amendment. Now I got to edit the video. Fourth Amendment, please. If you wrote down first, change it. The Fourth Amendment gives you protection from unreasonable searches and seizures. While we're at it, just to be clarified, what does the First Amendment give us some protection from? There's a few things.
Speech.
Yeah, there we go. I'm sorry, what was the other one?
Religion.
Yeah, freedom of speech, practicing religion, the press. So one thing to bear in mind, since we're going to be talking about policing, let's talk about that First Amendment. kind of a fortuitous mistake, perhaps. So, Jeff, he said that there is a freedom of speech. And, I'll go back to it. When you say freedom of speech, I assume, we're all on the same page that you have the ability to say certain things. Is that absolute, Joshua?
No.
No. Okay. If you, we'll give you an example, we'll make it shame and personalize here. If you stood up in class right now and cussed me out, do you think that you would be able to sit down as if that never happened because you have the freedom of speech? Or do you think that there would be some sort of consequences for that?
I think there would be consequences.
Right, probably something along the lines of being invited to leave class, or something. Well, we're not in a brawl, we're not in a crazy, or I should say, we're not in a bar, we're not in a crazy scenario. We're probably not going to fight, but there are going to be consequences, even though those are offensive words and they're not appropriate for this environment. So, but we have the freedom of speech. You have freedom, so why can't you stand up and cuss me out right now?
It's just the way it is. It's like in our court systems, if you're in a trial, you can't just say whatever you want to say.
That's interesting. I like that example. Well, I'll bring it back to you since you brought it up, the freedom of speech. Do you have anything to add on that? Why can't he or any of us? What about me? I mean, I use it. There's a little bit of power dynamic here. I said you can't, but can I cuss you guys out without consequence? Like, what do you think if I were to come in here completely inappropriately and just call you out of your name? What are some things that might happen to me? At the very least, yeah. Get reported, some sort of censure, a write-up, up into maybe even losing my job, right? There's a ton of options. I'm not positive exactly what would happen, but it wouldn't be great for me. It wouldn't be a great decision on my part. So it's not just you, it's me. We all now, even though we have the freedom of speech, we don't really have the freedom to say whatever we want without consequence. So what does the Bill of Rights say now? If the Bill of Rights says I have the freedom to say what I want, and now as we talk it out, we start realizing, well, I don't really have the freedom to say what I want. What's the difference? What is the Bill of Rights talking about? I don't know why I tried to talk and drink at the same time, but go ahead.
You're not the government.
Exactly. That is 100% right. He said, I am not the government. So, the government, you are free, you are secure from the government stopping you from saying what you want. But that doesn't mean that your boss can't, your parents can't, your friends can't, or that guy at the bar that you say something stupid to can't. There's going to be consequences from people that are not the government. So for instance, you guys have heard of homeowners associations, HOAs. Sometimes they restrict the ability to paint your house a certain color or put a certain flag in front of your house. That's freedom of speech. That is your speech. But the HOA can stop you from doing that because they're not the government. The police cannot come and tell you you can't say that in general. The government can't, government agents can't be sent to you and say, hey, you cannot practice this religion. You can't say this thing. However, the Fourth Amendment doesn't stop individuals from engaging or receiving consequence for their actions. So that brings, as we come back to the democracy discussion, one of the key aspects of living in a democracy is being free from undue government overreach, or just undue government influence. That's a decent definition. One of the key elements of a democracy is that we that live in that democracy are free from undue government influence or overreach. We talked about it a little bit. The Bill of Rights is a huge aspect of what protects us from that. If the government is who we're protected from, then the Constitution is what's protecting us from that overreach in and of itself, the way it was written. in addition to that, there's some other more specifically codified vehicles that protect us, and those would be case law. Individual case law. So, for instance, we'll go back to Miranda. Let's see. Christian, are the Miranda rights discussed anywhere in the Constitution? Do you think? Yeah, I've read it a time or two and I haven't seen it. So, if it's not in the Constitution and we're calling them rights, where do we find them? No, it's not the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence would be more of a letter that we wrote to England saying, you know, we want to break up. So the idea that these Miranda rights, well, where do we get the word Miranda from? Because if Miranda's not in there, who's Miranda? Absolutely. Supreme Court case. So case law. A case law in 1960, I want to say 1965. 63. 1963. I think in the scheme of things, 2 years is a rounding error. Yeah, 1963. It was a case law. Ernie Miranda, who had been arrested, and the case was overturned because he wasn't advised of certain rights. So that's where the term Miranda rights comes. So even though we're protected from this what we call overreach, there has to be a certain level of reach, I guess, for lack of a better word. The police still have to be able to enforce law, right? But they have to be reined in. So we'll give. Let's see. We'll go back over to Mr. Betts. If the police know that somebody is breaking the law inside their house, I will tell you, and we'll stipulate for this conversation, that they cannot just go in and stop that crime always. There are sometimes steps that need to be taken, search warrants and whatnot. Why can't the police, opinion-wise, in your opinion, why do you think we stop the police from just going into people's houses and stopping them from breaking the law?
Well, sometimes it's probably because in social norms, it would be breaking law, but in different people's point of view, like, let's say it's a Muslim religion
Okay.
and one of their kids done something wrong or the wife done something wrong and the husband was punishing them. In the American point of view, that would be assault or
I see.
abuse.
So difference of opinions, I guess, is what we're looking at. And so that enforcement action should be vetted by a third party before we take action in certain cases. That's an interesting perspective. One that I hadn't necessarily considered. Anybody else? We'll make it more specific. What about if you know they're cooking meth? In fact, I think meth was mentioned in the textbook. If you know that somebody's cooking meth in the house, and that they got a big old, or even not even cooking, you know they got a big old pile of meth. Because in cooking meth, it could be an emergency, maybe the house might blow up. But you know they got a big pile of meth on their kitchen table. Why can't we just go in? Why can't the police just go in and grab that meth?
There's not like an immediate threat to anyone.
Absolutely. So that's why the exigency isn't there. But why do you think it's written into the law? Like, in your opinion, why does society stop the police from going in there? What's bad about going in there? What's good about not doing it, or what's bad about doing it? Why?
Dangerous for citizens.
Does dangerous citizens just have police coming in willy-nilly? Let me hear from somebody else. I like that. Do we want the police being able to come in and take that meth? I mean, I would say that there's a little bit of torn emotion there. We want the police to be able to get that meth, but why don't we want them just coming in willy-nilly? Why do we stop them?
Dangerous for them too.
For the police? Sure, there we go. I mean, that's an idea, yeah. Tactically dangerous to just walk into somebody's house. It's not the safest thing to walk into what could be a gunfight. Because if I come into your house in the middle of the night, then there's probably going to be consequences. Somebody could pull a gun, and now we've got a shootout. Interesting. Yes.
Another one is, what would stop them from going into your house if they think you doing something?
I like how you put that, if they think you're doing something. I will tell you, I was gonna ask you, but I'll just tell you, the police aren't perfect. I think we all know that. Having known a couple myself, their mistakes are made. What if they just think there's a big pile of meth? What if it looks like a big pile of meth from the outside? What if somebody just told them it was a big pile of meth? At some point, there has to be a threshold to ensure there is at least a probability. I mean, to coin a phrase, probable cause before we go in, before we let the police go into somebody's house. That idea of probable cause protects us as citizens. I mean, I was actually talking to Mrs. Sullivan yesterday. We were investigating and surveilling a serial burglar. In the unit that I worked, we followed, one of the big things we did, we followed burglars. And we had I'm talking about a huge series of burglaries, 50, 60, 70 burglaries, all being done by the same person. Commercial stores after they're closed at night. He's on video. He's wearing a mask, but he was wearing a certain type of shoe. He had certain physical features, and through investigation and some tips, we were pointed to a guy. And we started watching him. And the guy was wearing the same kind of military boots that the guy in the video that breaking into other places was. And he lived in the area. And we started looking at the pattern and realizing every time, and started looking at the pattern of when they occurred. And it always occurred on Fridays. Thursday night, Friday morning, overnight. And we started looking at this guy and realizing this guy was in the military. He was in the military reserves. And we matched up on the calendar. Every time these burglaries occurred, they only occurred like once a month. Hit a bunch of them once a month. And we realized that the guy we were following, he had reserve duty once a month. And the Thursday night, Friday morning before he left for his weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, that's when all those burglaries were occurring. So you got a guy wearing the same boots as the video. You got a guy matching the physical description. He lives in the area, and the pattern is just perfect. But people are protected by their rights. You can't just snatch people up without enough probable cause. I mean, I think in that story, we're getting pretty close. Any ideas? Well, if you wanted to find out just a little bit more information, what are your investigative ideas? I'll tell you in a minute what we did, but I'd be curious what you guys have to add. If you wanted to find out any more pieces of this puzzle, are there any ideas yeah?
Maybe undercover.
Sure. I mean, it's kind of what we did. We were plainclothes surveillance units, so we followed them around, but we were never able to follow him when he was engaging. We couldn't be close enough to follow him while he was engaging in burglaries. But yeah, absolutely, it's a good tool. What we decided to do was write a search warrant for his cell phone and ping it. We want to know where, because if I know where your cell phone goes, then I know where you go. And then we knew that we were coming up on the dates when the burglary should occur in the next couple weeks. We write a search warrant, we find out where his cell phone's going to be for the next couple weeks, and the burglaries occur while we're waiting for those results. We got them. We know that when those results come back, we're gonna see that cell phone moving from every one of those burglaries. We get the results back. No. He was in Utah for the last 2 weeks on military duty. That, despite the fact that all the stars lined up, I mean, of course, we did some verification and whatnot, and it was true. Our suspect was in Utah, and the burglaries still occurred with that guy on video doing them. Just couldn't be him. He was seen, the guy we're following was seen in Utah, so it wasn't just his cell phone that went to Utah. He was in the military, and the military folks vouched for him. No matter how much the stars aligned, we were absolutely positive that was him that did it. Just wasn't, we were wrong. Was that malice? Was there any malice in my investigators' hearts when they were convinced it was him? Like, did they break, were the investigators overreaching or unlawful? They're just wrong. It's legal to be wrong sometimes. And that's what happened in that case. We were just wrong. It absolutely looked like it was going to be him. So I tell that story to say this, to go back to that pile of mess. Sometimes investigations can lead to wrong results, and you don't want the police unvetted just knocking down your door and being wrong. You want to have an ability to be secure and run that probable cause by a third party. In this case, it would be a judge. So there's a balance between that, though. We want the police to be able to engage in enforcement, but we also want to be free. So one balance test that we talk about is that safety versus freedom. One example of that right now that gets a lot of news, it's starting to wane now, but in the last couple of years, was TSA. You know, as we go on airlines, when we had after September 11th and the way things ramped up with security at the airports, we are searched a lot more in airports than we were before. And there's a lot of pushback. There's folks who just don't want to be searched. Everybody has that balance differently. There are some folks who absolutely err on the side of safety. Folks that just say, I'm willing to give up all these freedoms as long as I'm safe. Because that's what's important to them. I don't want to crash, I don't want to hijack, or I don't want meth in my neighborhood, or I would rather you just snatch up the wrong burglar, because at least you'll get the right burglar eventually. Like there's just people that, you know, keep me safe and I will give up these freedoms. And then there's people way over here who say, I don't care, I don't need you to keep me safe, I'll keep me safe. Give me my freedom, stay out of my home, stay out of my life. I'll make my decisions. Now, which one of those is, I'm not here to say which one of those is right, but those are the two extremes, and then most people fall somewhere in the middle. What are your thoughts on those two extremes? Have you experienced those types of conversations? Yeah.
I mean, I have to agree. There's people on both sides of the extreme of some people don't care what rights or freedoms they may lose in order to live in their utopia, I guess, versus others don't want any part of anything involved in their life that would hinder any freedoms or rights that they have.
Yeah. You got a computer in front of you there. Can you Google, or maybe you know off the top of your head, I'm drawing a blank on who said this, but somebody said, those who are willing to give up their freedoms for security deserve neither.
Yeah.
Is it Benjamin Franklin? Thank you. And it's a paraphrase. I'm sure that's not the exact quote, but those who are willing to give up their freedoms for security deserve neither. Thank you. It's an interesting concept. But I'm sure we all are willing to give up some freedom, right? I'd imagine. I mean, you have to be awfully extreme to say that I want absolutely no security because I want to do whatever I want to do. And when it comes to regulation, I mean, our country is pretty good at regulating things. It could be safety, regulating how far apart each one of the studs in the wall has to be, how thick the drywall has to be. This is a commercial building, so how thick the glass has to be. And if we're on a second floor, then maybe it's different. How often airplanes have to be repaired or maintained, how much education a pilot has to have, how much education a police officer has to have. Those are all regulations, they're all rules that are taking away, in theory, taking away a freedom. I should be able to live in a house that has studs as far apart as I want, whatever I want. But what am I exchanging for that? safety, that, in theory, the house might fall down. You're exchanging that freedom for some sort of safety. So it's a rare find and to find somebody who was absolutely wants no regulation at all. Because I think it would cause a bit of chaos. So we need to regulate, as a society, we have to regulate our police officers, but also allow them to do the job that they're meant to do. They have to still enforce the law. One thing that comes up with that, I wrote this note to remind me, but I did. I'll pose it to you. I hear this, or I think as a society, we hear this conversation piece a lot, and that is, if you've got nothing to hide, then why are you worried? So that has to do a lot with giving up freedoms. That big pile of meth in your house, I would venture to say that probably there's not a big comedic pile of meth in any of our houses today. So the police, it's okay for the police to come in. You got nothing to hide, right? Like, would you be okay with, while you're here, the police go in and search in your bedroom to see if there's a big pile of meth in there? Because I mean, there isn't one in there, right? What do you care? There's no meth in there. What do you?
There's just invasion of privacy, like somewhere where I stay and reside. Like, if you go in there and just go in and start searching, they're invading my personal space.
Yeah, I agree. The idea of that is a fairly slippery slope to have that discussion of, if you've got nothing to hide, then why are you worried? I've heard it discussed in things like searches, consenting to searches. Will you let me search your house? No. You got nothing to hide. To video, like video surveillance. I haven't seen it too much in North Carolina, but I see it a lot in California via freeway cameras. So one of my investigative tools was I could know in general where somebody goes all the time just by typing in their license plate, because there's cameras all over the county. And if I type in your license plate, it'll tell me every camera you drove by. That's an investigative tool. Do we necessarily want the government knowing where we go? I don't think we're excited about it, but there's that balance test. It's a bit of public knowledge because you're out in public, so it's hard to rein that in. It's hard for me to say, I don't want you to know where I am, but I'm going to drive in public to get there because anybody can see me going there. But that clearinghouse of data, the ability to pull that in just a few seconds, can be a scary proposition. But the argument to that is, if you've got nothing to hide, you're not doing anything wrong, then why do you care if somebody knows where you go? Similar to going to your house. Some folks feel as though it's an invasion of their privacy to take a photograph of their license plate as they drive by these cameras. Yes.
So, an example of a guy that gets in jail for a mistake. So there's this guy who got in jail for supposedly meth.
Or meth?
Well, what the police thought was meth.
Okay.
Once they got there and tested it, it turned out as kitty litter.
That is an unfortunate mistake for sure. Yeah. It must have been some pretty crystalline kitty litter for sure.
But maybe,
Meth being awfully crystal-like.
I think it said like he has the kitty litter to do when like frost comes.
All right. And then there's maybe facilitated mistakes like that. I've run into it a ton of times where folks will have a baggie full of sliced up certain type of nut that really has a resemblance to crack cocaine. If you have a baggie full of squared up, chopped up nuts, and they look just like crack cocaine, and it's in your pocket, you're hanging on the street corner, what do you think you're doing with those nuts? Those your snack? In these cases, probably not. We call it bunk. That guy was selling bad dope, but is it against? It wasn't in possession of cocaine. It wasn't crack. It was nuts, cut up to look like it. I would imagine it's probably better for him to get caught by us than caught by somebody else. But it's a mistake. hopefully you're trained enough you can recognize it. It's amazing how close how bunk can resemble the actual product. All right, I want you to pay close attention. I'd like to get you out of here before the weather starts, if y'all are all right. But specifically starting on right at the end of page 18, there are demographics discussing support and lack of support for law enforcement in general. How support can be factored by age, racial demographics, gender, socioeconomic status. So it starts, I'm talking about I think it's the last paragraph of 18, so mostly 19. And it goes on for several pages after that. So please pay close attention to that as you study for this week and for your exam, because we didn't have a chance to touch on that too much, and I want you guys to have a grasp on that. So I'll just say it's page 18 to try to keep it as transparent as possible. No curveballs on the exam. Oh, 18 to 20, that's what it looks like. There are other discussions of who the police answer to that you're still responsible for, but it wouldn't necessarily be as heavy as those. I want to give you a pretty big hint there. Any questions on what we discussed today? What are your questions?